All right, welcome to the first episode of 2026 and happy new year to the Hearse Chaser podcast listeners. We're glad you're here and we're glad to talk about some exciting things that we have in store for 2026. I love this episode. The first episode of the year is always my favorite because there are so many hopes and wishes for change and betterness. And that's what I'm looking for in 2026 when it comes to the podcast, to the topics, to helping folks make good decisions. Before we get into it, here's what we're going to talk about in this episode. First, we're going to talk about making sure this year is not the year to procrastinate. So, we're going to talk about some ways that we can use the things that have happened over the last few weeks. We had a lot of holidays happen. Talk about how that can be very motivating to get things taken care of. Two, we're going to talk about one celebrity who passed away last year that we can learn some lessons from, things that I've seen over and over again in my practice. And for some reason, even celebrities, the rich and famous, even they sometimes don't heed good advice. And third and finally, talk about ways that the future can be better by starting today. Welcome back to another episode of the Hearse Chaser Podcast Show.
You're listening to the Hearse Chaser podcast show. Here's your host, Stephen McClelland.
All right, so making a resolution. I'm not sure what yours is. Every year mine is about the same. Hit the gym, eat more kale. Actually, I've never had kale in my life. And the one resolution that I think I'd encourage everybody to think about is either start your estate plan or at least take a look at it. All right. So the first thing I want to talk about is the procrastination pandemic that we have had in our society. I think it's just a human thing. We often choose the path of least resistance. The hard things we often do last. And estate planning is one of those things that I wouldn't necessarily say is hard. It's just hard to find time for. And a lot of times in my practice, when I have 30 and 40-year-olds, sometimes 20-year-olds come into my practice, I just am so excited to see them that it's on their mind to do their estate plan. Mostly in that case, they're concerned about having guardians for their kids. But most of my clients are 65 and older because they finally have retired, they've got some more free time, and they finally think, well, now is the time to do it. So what I want you to know is that if you haven't done an estate plan, that is very common. According to a 2025 survey, so last year, only 24% of Americans have a will, which is actually a decline from previous years. So we're not actually moving in the right direction. And even more shocking, 55% of Americans have no estate planning documents whatsoever. So, as an estate planning attorney, it's very alarming, and it only makes legal issues more difficult when I see these kind of numbers because the legal fixes are costly and they consume a lot of time. And I try to emphasize as much as I can to my clients. This is really setting up your family for success. So I don't like this trend. If you haven't done an estate plan or haven't looked at it in a minute, you're not alone. But there's a big danger. So what I hope from this resolution, this idea, is that we can move those who are unprepared, 76%, to those who are protected, 24%. That would be the goal. Hopefully, this podcast gets you thinking about that. So, as we think about the last few weeks, a lot of things happen in November and December that can really change estate plans and also put into focus the people that you trust are typically the people that are around your table that come to visit during the holidays. So if you do have an estate plan, you might want to think, well, who did we list as the responsible people versus who were the people around us during the holidays? And I can tell you, having had I think I've had around 300 consultations last year. 300. It didn't matter if it was January or July or August. a lot of times people brought up the holidays, who was there, who wasn't there, as a basis for making a decision. And that can change for a number of reasons, whether your child, they may have things going on in their own life or they rotate holidays. You know, I have personally taken this perspective. This is my perspective. When I get older, my wife and I are older, and our kids make the decision whether to come to our house or someone else's house. My philosophy, the only thing I think works is to simply tell my kids, if you come, you come. Love for you to do. We're going to be fine whether or not you come or not. We'd love for you to come. But sometimes, that interaction, I hear it on both sides. I hear the kids, I hear the parents saying, well, they don't come, or we tell them to come, they don't come. And, you know, um, people are going to do what they want to do, which that is a good indicator of, is that person a trustworthy person? Now, maybe if they're not there, that doesn't mean they're not the best choice. But I'm saying the ones who do make an effort to come, the ones that do call, the ones that do check in, are the ones that you might want to put in those positions. So I want to tell you that the number one success, the number one thing that leads to success is when you, as the one who has created a estate plan, have a good working relationship with somebody who's younger than you, importantly, and number two, checks in with you. Okay. That relationship. You want to have good dialogue with them. And I generally say if you don't talk to them at least once every quarter, once every 3 months, then it's probably not a good person to choose. Okay. Now there may be exceptions to that, but it's just giving you some advice that I think is helpful. Now, I want to talk about a celebrity that passed away last year, and he's a celebrity um, I really liked. He was a great actor. His name was Gene Hackman. Okay, he's been in a ton of movies. Um, what movies? He's been in Mooseport in 2004, Runaway Jury 2003, Behind Enemy Lines 2001, The Heist, just a ton. I just loved the way he spoke. I don't know. Some people have it, some people don't. I don't necessarily think I have that, but he I thought was just a great actor in a lot of different types of movies too. Anyway, what was unique about his circumstance is the timing of his death and his wife's death. Okay, so the wife actually passed first, and then he passed about a week later. And there's been some interesting things that have come out of their estate plan, as it always does. One of the things that I found interesting was he had done an estate plan and it wasn't updated. I'll tell you the year. It looks like the last time he did estate planning was in 2005. Okay. 2005. And he died in 2025. So 20 years. Okay. Now, first of all, if it's been 20 years since you've done an estate plan, you have to have an attorney look at it. You have to sit down with an attorney. Um, it's always interesting to me, kind of the dynamics between financial advisors and um, attorneys. Financial advisors, I think, do a good job checking in once, twice, 3 times a year, get advice. They do a better job, I think, than attorneys do. But that's kind of the model, right? Financial advisors are typically getting paid a percentage every year, which could be $10,000 if you have $1 million in assets or so. So they have a financial model to check in with you, and attorneys don't typically. They don't typically have a model, so it's sort of a needs based. You need an attorney, you talk to an attorney. I would say that after 10, 20 years, right, that it would have been important to update their estate plan. So here was one of the major problems. It appears that in their estate plan, okay, they named, I think, each other as a successor trustee or trustees. So like so when two people die, kind of at the same time, you have to look at each of their estates separately, because it's not like it's one lump sum. Okay, you don't put it all together. So So in his case, he had a will and a trust governing his estate. So will and trust, love that. That's what I do a lot of. He named his wife first as the sole beneficiary of his estate, executor, and trustee. But here's the problem. Guess who he named as his successor attorney? Executive. Made a mistake. It was an attorney. Named the attorney. Now, I don't typically like to name myself as anyone's agent or anyone's trustee. My preference is family, family, family. Okay, I push really hard back. I say, you please, it's much better to have a family member because my job as the attorney, as I like to draft the documents, make sure they go according to plan, and to stand behind that work, okay, and help the next generation if they need help making sure money goes where it's supposed to. The problem here is the attorney, he passed away in 2019. So he passed away 6 years before, about 6 years before the Hackmans passed away. So a couple things. One, when you pick out an attorney, I think it's important to figure out how old they are, right? If at one time there was an attorney practicing in our area that was 90 years old, still doing estate planning. I thought, I don't know. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't feel comfortable being 90 and doing estate planning. I just wouldn't. Um, as well, as long as I had like successor, other attorneys working in my firm, yes, like I do now if I were 90. But as a solo, as a 90, I wouldn't feel comfortable with that. I would also say um, uh, there is no guarantee that even though I am much younger than most of my clients, that I would outlive them. In fact, one of my conference rooms has a bunch of airplanes in it because I'm a private pilot. And what happens if I have a car wreck or a plane crash or something like that? Then I really can't be here for the family. So it also puts pressure, I think, on the clients to think, okay, we really need to think this through, have a family member. And sometimes that's going to nieces and nephews. Okay. So in their case, they named their attorney and even didn't update it. Now, I don't know if that attorney just failed to contact his clients and say, hey, so and so has passed away. But 5 years, I think, is plenty of time, I think, to kind of get to update. I think generally, I've seen folks update their estate plan every 7 years. That's been kind of the magic number I've seen. I'd prefer that to be around 2 or 3 years because I think a lot happens every 2 or 3 years. 7 years, a whole lot. But I would strongly encourage doing that sooner. So that was mistake number one. You can't have a situation where the successors run out. You got to have backups, backups, backups. Try to stay away from attorneys to do that.
Thank you for tuning in to the Hearse Chaser podcast show. Our mission is to be your first choice for last wishes. Want to dive deeper? Join us over at the Hearse Chaser Academy, where we've created 8 on-demand courses for each stage of life. From young adulthood to retirement, navigating separation or blended families, and everything in between, we help you plan for the future, no matter where you're at. Now stay with us as the ride continues on the Hearse Chaser podcast show.
The only reason we knew he had a trust and a will is because the will got filed. Okay. And the problem I see a lot with estate plans. So if you have an estate plan, if you're thinking about doing an estate plan, is especially if you do a trust, I think trusts are wonderful. They, I think, solve most, if not all, the problems clients have about the future. The problem I see is that the setting up of the trust, there's missing parts. There are things that aren't done well. And that is called a funding problem. So think of a trust like a bucket, and you have all your assets out here. And when you pass, you got to make sure that the assets are set up so they go directly into the trust. We don't want to have to use a will which says, hey, if I leave anything out, put it into my trust. I don't want to use that will because the will requires a judge, requires probate. So I don't like when I see pour over wills filed in our public court, and I see a pour over will, I think, somebody messed up, somebody didn't set something up. Or in a weird case, like this particular case, the wife died just like a week before Gene Hackman died. Okay. And um, there's kind of a problem with that short period of time. Most estate plans have this survivorship clause that says you have to outlive me 30 days. Theirs had 90 days in order to receive anything. So, example, thinking about my wife and I, if I died, then my wife died 20 days later, she technically didn't live long enough to receive anything. So then it would go to my successor beneficiaries, the kiddos. Well, you've got to have a clause in there. Otherwise, it creates these estate after estate. So you have a probate within a probate. I died, then my wife died, right? And then it would be a really complex scenario like in a car crash, right? Everybody dies about the same time. We have these provisions in order to make sure that it doesn't get too messy. Okay. Because generally, if it's 30 days or in this case, 90 days, if somebody passes away, like my spouse passed away in 30 days, I'm not going to be thinking about estate plan within that period of time. Okay. That's just not going to be on anyone's mind. Um, and so that's what that can help save you. So you want to make sure your estate plan has something along those lines. Also concerning they believed, I think that Gene he lived a week longer than his wife, but he had Alzheimer's. He wasn't able to, people weren't reaching out to him, which I think is scary as well. So I used to think, it was funny to me as a kid. I just remember every time I went over to grandma's house, she was always on the phone talking to someone. And in some ways, that's kind of like a safety net. The fact that she called, so many people called and checked in with her, and if somebody didn't call, like that was the first thing that grandma would report. She'd say, "Hey, I called so and so today, and she didn't answer today, and I'm kind of worried, but maybe she was out doing this because she mentioned it." So I think phones are great to check in with people, and for whatever reason, a whole week, and nobody checked on them. So that's a kind of concern, I think, in our society that we don't have as many check-ins with folks. So make sure that you have people that kind of know where you are. Um, we don't want the postal service to be the ones to figure out that there's a lot of mail here, something's going on. So having people to talk to, I think, is definitely important. Um, Okay, so I think there's some lessons to learn. I could go deeper into that, but I feel like it's pretty clear. He didn't have a backup. It looks like a lot of his assets did not go through his trust. And so that became kind of an issue in that 90-day survivorship trap. Got to make sure you have that in your documents. Um, but the funding it is the most important thing. I might say, like, if you have a trust and you bought a new property, open a new bank account, anything new, okay? Very important to make sure that that new asset is put into your trust as well. I would say this: one of the techniques that can help your estate plan better is this technique. Let's say that you and your spouse died, or you died, and that person, whoever that trusted person is, executor, trustee, power of attorney, they come into the home and they find your estate planning documents. How hard is it from the moment they locate that binder? How much trouble are they going to have? Because a lot of what we do is centered on that exact moment when they open up that binder and they find things. Okay. And so one of the best things you can do that doesn't even require an attorney is to write down where your assets are. So that if you died, I can open up and say, oh, January 26th, 2026, here's the assets. Doesn't require a lawyer, but at least the power of attorney, if they have to take over, if you have a stroke or something, they know where things are. Now, financial advisors, I think, are really good about this. They do a good job of writing things down, making sure that they know where things are. Even if they don't manage it, they have a pretty good idea. Real estate and property, they may not write down as much. It depends on how much connection you have with them, but making sure, I think in a lot of ways, financial advisors are the greatest help to families when somebody passes because they just know all the things about you. So I think that's important. So that's the idea there. I want to talk about digital legacy, digital assets. This is becoming more important. I didn't realize this. There was a study last year that 60% of younger generations, okay, younger folks, just not typically my client, but they're now prioritizing their digital legacy. So we're talking about like social media, we're talking about photos as much as they do their physical assets. And that might be because they have more photos than they have assets. But I do think it's important to talk about those things, those photos, those memories, especially as they relate to families, making sure that the people you want to have access to those devices and those photos. You may not want everybody to have access to those. And the problem, I think, in most estate planning is they don't even discuss um, those wills. They don't discuss who can manage that digital inventory. And I think that's something that is becoming more of a thing that I'm hearing more clients talk about. I don't think my 70-year-olds and 80-year-olds are really concerned about that, but I think the 40s and 50s, I think that's going to be a bigger thing, I think, in the next few years. As you think about the future, really the idea of estate planning is that you're doing it for someone else. I think that the term there is altruistic, right? You're doing this for someone else. You're planting trees, the shade of which you'll never expect to sit in, and that is really a discipline. It's a habit. It's something that will save your kids a lot of concern for the future. Because a lot of times we get calls where there has been a health event, came out of the blue, and they say, we don't know what's what, there's no power of attorney. And I don't want that to be the motivator. The motivator I want is, hey, we know we need to do this. Let's talk to someone that can get us moving in the right direction. Okay? And I think, a great resolution. Sometimes the tax laws change, the laws change in estate planning. I don't see that happening too much, to be honest with you, from a perspective of, we don't want to have to call 80-year-olds back into the office to make changes to their estate plan, that because the laws change. So I don't think it changes too much over the years. So if doing an estate plan is your goal, if you have an estate plan, I think this podcast, best way to take a look at your estate plan, find your documents, make sure you know where they are. Be surprised how many clients come in and say they can't find their will. They know they did it 7 years ago. Number two, make sure that you have successor trustees. Make sure they also know where your documents are. And there's nothing wrong with getting a business card from the estate planning attorney and just send that to your kids. That was probably the last story I'll end you with. A few years ago, a client said, can you mail me 3 business cards? And I said, absolutely. And I said, well, that's kind of interesting. 3. I wonder why do you need 3? And he said, my kids are coming in for the holidays, and I just wanted to wrap them so they could open up your business card under the Christmas tree, so that they know who you are and have that information. And I think that is just a wonderful thing, a wonderful thought to have. I felt kind of funny that my face was someone's Christmas present. That would be terrifying to me. But I think the sentiment is true. Just making sure your kids have that, know that, whether it's in a text, a letter, just making sure that all the little details are taken care of. And now with the new year, I hope that you have a wonderful new year. Hope you had, I think, the Black Eyed Peas, and I hope it's a wonderful year. And we're excited for some new things in the Hearse Chaser podcast show. We're going to unveil later on. Thanks for riding along. We're looking forward to a wonderful new year with all y'all.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Hearse Chaser podcast show. Please remember, you can't outrun a hearse, but you can leave your family with a smooth ride.